The Burlington airport at 6 in the morning smelled like burned coffee and pine resin and something that was purely, stubbornly Vermont, a cold that came with personality, that pressed itself against the sliding glass doors like it had somewhere to be. Claire Ashford had not been home in 3 years. She stood at the baggage carousel with her red suitcase and her Portland, Maine coat she was already discovering entirely inadequate for actual Vermont winter. She had her daughter's voice in her ear from last night. Mom, you have to come. I need you there. This is my engagement party. And Claire had said, of course, sweetheart, I wouldn't miss it. Which was true. It was also true that standing here, watching strangers wrestle their luggage off the belt, she felt the specific dread of someone about to walk back into the life she'd quietly left behind. She spotted her suitcase. She grabbed it. She turned around. And there was Daniel. He was standing just past the carousel barrier, hands in his coat pockets, a paper cup in one hand, not for him, she realized a half second later, because he was holding it out toward her. He had not called her name or waved. He was just standing there the way Daniel always stood. Completely still, completely present, like he had arrived early and was in no hurry for anything. He was 54 now. She did the math the way she always did. Reflexively, he had turned 54 in October, which meant she had forgotten to call him on his birthday. Again. His hair was more silver than she remembered from their last video call, close cropped, and he'd grown a slight beard that made him look, she thought, against her will, like someone who had gotten more handsome while not particularly trying. He was wearing a dark wool coat and the green scarf she had mailed him 3 Christmases ago as a peace offering after she forgot his birthday that year too. He was still wearing it. Something happened in her chest that she immediately diagnosed as altitude adjustment. Never mind that Burlington was essentially flat. You look tired, he said as she walked up. Good morning to you too. The coffee is from the cart by baggage claim B. You've been flying since 4:30. He held it out. Dark roast, 1 sugar, splash of oat milk, nothing else. She stopped walking. She stared at the cup. She had switched to oat milk from regular milk approximately 14 months ago. She had not told Daniel this. She had barely told herself. It had just happened gradually. A Tuesday in October. A different carton in the store. How did you... Sophie mentioned it. He said it simply. Grab your bag. She grabbed her bag. She took the coffee. She followed him through the sliding doors into the Vermont cold, which greeted her like a firm, opinionated handshake. And she told herself that the warmth spreading through her chest was purely and entirely the coffee. She almost believed it. The drive to Pinecrest was 55 minutes through country that looked like someone had decided to take the concept of winter and make it as literal as possible. White fields, dark pines, an occasional farmhouse with smoke coming from the chimney, lit gold from inside. Claire pressed her cheek against the cold passenger window and watched it all go by, and tried not to think about the last time she'd made this drive. She'd been leaving then. Suitcases in the back. Marriage ended with the quiet devastation of a candle going out. Not a blow, just a slow guttering, and then dark. She had cried the whole way to the airport and then spent 3 years building a new life, piece by careful piece, in a city where she could be whoever she needed to be. She was fine now. She was genuinely, substantially fine. She just also hadn't been back. You're quiet, Daniel said. I'm tired. You're nervous. She looked at him. His eyes were on the road, 2 hands easy on the wheel, and he had the particular talent, infuriating and comforting in equal measure, of saying true things in a tone that made it impossible to be defensive about them. It's been a while, she admitted. 3 years? I know how long it's been, Daniel. I'm not criticizing. A pause. I'm just saying I know it feels like a lot, coming back. Outside, a field of snow went past, pure and unbroken, and a stand of birch trees stood at its edge like they were waiting for something. Does it still look the same? She asked quietly. The town. Mostly, he glanced at her. Henderson's sold a hardware store. There's a wine bar where the diner used to be, which the over 60 crowd has not forgiven. She smiled despite herself. Please tell me your dad is leading the resistance. He organized a strongly worded letter writing campaign. Daniel's mouth curved. 12 signatories. 3 of them went to the wine bar the following week and have not been seen since. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, the kind that opened something up, and Daniel glanced over at the sound of it with an expression she couldn't quite read before he looked back at the road. There it is, he said, quietly, almost to himself. There what is? Nothing. A small smile. Welcome home, Claire. The Ashford family lake cabin had been built in 1962 by Claire's grandfather, expanded twice, and had never once been adequately described as small. It was, however, being used this week to house 14 people across 4 bedrooms, 3 fold-out cots, a converted sunroom, and 1 distinctly limited bathroom situation. Claire stood in the driveway and looked at it. Someone had strung lights along the roofline. The old pine wreaths were on both doors. Smoke rose from the stone chimney in the particular lazy way of a fire that had been going for hours. And through the front window she could see the warm, chaotic silhouette of her family already in motion. Her sister Bess was gesturing at something. Her nephew was sliding in socks across the hardwood, and there, in the kitchen doorway, was her daughter Sophie, who had clearly been watching for headlights. Sophie burst out the front door wearing approximately no coat and threw her arms around Claire before she'd even gotten her suitcase out of the trunk. You're here, Sophie said into her shoulder. Mom, you're actually here. I told you I was coming. I know, but I didn't fully believe it until right now. She pulled back, holding Claire's face in both hands the way she'd done since she was 4 years old, examining her with those serious dark eyes. You look good. Tired but good. Daniel made you coffee, didn't he? It came up. Sophie grinned and turned to Daniel, who was pulling both suitcases from the trunk. Daniel, I'm so glad you're here. Have you talked to Grandma yet? Sophie, I texted her when we landed. She's very excited. Sophie's grin went slightly complicated in a way Claire couldn't quite parse. She has opinions about the room situation. What room situation? Claire asked. Come inside, it's freezing. The room situation, as it turned out, was this. The main bedroom, Elaine, Claire's mother, and her sister Ruth, who was 80 and needed the ground floor. The first guest room, Bess and her husband Pete, and their youngest, Kyle, age 9, who had been promised the pullout. Bess. The sunroom, Daniel's son Thomas, and Sophie's college roommate Jess, who had been warned about the heating situation and had brought sleeping bags. The second guest room, the one with the slanted ceiling and the view of the lake, and, crucially, 1 queen bed was, according to Elaine, for Claire. And Daniel, Elaine added, setting down her tea with the calm of someone announcing it was going to be slightly cloudy tomorrow. Silence. Not from Elaine, who continued arranging Christmas cookies on a plate with complete serenity. Mom, Claire said, the Hendersons' place is full. Ruth brought an air mattress that's already being used, and the couch in the sitting room is very comfortable. I'm told, although I'll admit I haven't sat on it recently. I'll take the couch, Daniel said. I'll take the couch, Claire said at the exact same moment. They looked at each other. You're the guest, Daniel said. So are you. Your family. So are you, she said, and then was slightly startled. She'd said it so easily, so immediately, because it was true. Daniel had been coming to this cabin since 1993, had driven her father to chemotherapy every Tuesday for 18 months before he died, had fixed the dock 3 summers ago and refused payment, but it still came out of her with the weight of something. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression and was gone. I'll take the couch, he said again, settled and picked up his bag, and that was apparently that. Elaine watched him go up the stairs and then turned back to her cookies and said, to no one in particular, he's a good man. Mom, I'm just noting it. Please stop noting it. Elaine arranged a star-shaped cookie precisely in the center of the plate and smiled to herself, and Claire went upstairs before she could say anything she'd regret. At 11:12 p.m., the cabin had gone quiet in the particular way of old houses that breathe and settle, full of sleeping people. Claire was not sleeping. She was lying in the queen bed, staring at the slanted ceiling, listening to the wind come off the lake, trying to identify the specific flavor of awake she was experiencing. It wasn't anxiety, exactly. It wasn't the bad kind of sleeplessness. The 2 a.m. inventory of regrets kind she'd gotten very familiar with in the year after the divorce. It was something else. Something that hummed. She was thinking about how Daniel had held her coffee cup out without being asked. She was thinking about the green scarf. She was thinking, with considerable alarm, that this line of thinking needed to stop. He is your best friend, she told herself firmly. He has been your best friend for 30 years. You are not going to develop a situation about your best friend at 52 because he remembered your coffee order. A sound from downstairs. A significant sound. A sound like, if she had to describe it, a wooden frame making a very final decision about its own structural integrity. Then, silence. Then, HM. That was Daniel's voice. Daniel's very calm, very measured voice, which was the voice he used when something had gone wrong and he was assessing the extent of it. Claire got out of bed. She went to the top of the stairs and looked down. The sitting room lamp was on. Daniel was standing next to what had recently been the couch, a 1,998 floral print piece of furniture that had always been somewhat aspirational in its claims to comfort, and was now approximately 30% closer to the floor on one side, one leg having given way in a manner that appeared terminal. He looked up at her. She looked at him. He was in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, and his hair was slightly mussed from having been, presumably, on the couch before it expressed its opinion. And he was holding one of the cushions in a way that made him look endearingly puzzled, like he had somehow offended it. The couch, she said. The couch, he agreed, is broken. Yep. She came down the stairs. She crouched and looked at the leg. It wasn't going to be fixed tonight. It possibly wasn't going to be fixed at all, given that the wood had gone soft with age and split cleanly at the joint. You can't sleep on this, she said. I'll be fine. Daniel, you're 6 feet tall. You cannot sleep on a half-collapsed couch. I've slept in worse. You absolutely have not. Come upstairs. She stood. She said it the way she would have said it 20 years ago. Matter of fact. Because that was what you did when your friend had nowhere to sleep. You made room. It wasn't complicated. It's a queen bed. I'll build a wall of pillows. We're adults. He looked at her for a moment. In the lamplight. His eyes were that particular shade of warm brown she'd known so long, she sometimes forgot to notice it. And right now they were doing something careful and quiet. You sure? He said. It's a bed, Daniel. Not a moral dilemma. He almost smiled. You have always been excellent at those distinctions. Get your pillow. I'm going back to sleep. She went upstairs. She built a careful and thorough wall of pillows down the center of the bed, a demilitarized zone of cotton and feathers, and she lay back down on her side and stared at the ceiling and told herself this was completely normal. He came in quietly. He settled on his side. The bed barely moved. He had always been careful, deliberate in the way he moved through space, conscious of taking up exactly the room he needed and no more. Good night, Claire, he said, in the dark. Good night, she said. She counted the knots in the wood on the ceiling. She listened to his breathing slow towards sleep. She told herself, very firmly, that the warmth she felt at his presence across 6 inches of pillow was purely the body heat of another human being in a cold Vermont bedroom. She was a 52-year-old woman who read romance novels for a living and sold them to other women who needed to believe in something. She knew exactly what this feeling was. She closed her eyes and declined to name it anyway. She woke to light through the frost-edged windows and the sound of someone moving in the kitchen below, the soft percussion of cabinet doors and a coffee grinder, and she lay still for a moment, taking in the sensation of being here, the smell of the cabin, cedar and old books and wood smoke, before she became aware that Daniel's side of the pillow wall was empty and neatly straightened, his side of the bed made, as if he'd never been there. She went downstairs. He was at the stove, back to her, in yesterday's dark wool sweater and jeans, and the kitchen smelled profoundly of coffee and something warm and sweet he'd found the cinnamon, apparently, and the old cast iron pan, and was making what appeared to be French toast from the thick-cut bread Elaine kept in the freezer for exactly this purpose. He heard her on the stairs and turned slightly. Morning. What time is it? 7:15. Everyone else is still sleeping. Sit down. She sat at the kitchen table. He poured coffee into one of the old mugs, the heavy cream-colored ones with the cabin logo that her father had ordered from a catalog in 1985, and set it in front of her. Dark roast. 1 sugar, slightly less this time because he must have been watching her with the airport cup and noticed she'd barely used the sweetness. A careful, small pour of oat milk. She wrapped her hands around it. Daniel. Me. How do you do that? He turned back to the stove and flipped the French toast. Do what? You know what. A pause, he said, very evenly. I've known you for 30 years, Claire. I know how you take your coffee. It's not complicated. It's oat milk. I switched 14 months ago. Sophie mentioned it in March. Sophie had mentioned it in March. Claire stored this fact next to the green scarf and the airport cup and tried to decide what, if anything, to do with it. She worries about me, Claire said. She loves you. He slid 2 pieces of French toast onto a plate from where, she noticed, he had quietly found the good plates, the ones they only got out for Christmas morning, and put it in front of her. People who love you pay attention. She looked at the plate. She looked up at him. He was already turning back to the pan, making a second batch, entirely unaware of or ignoring the fact that he had just said something that hit her somewhere very specific and undefended. People who love you pay attention. She ate her French toast. Outside. The lake was frozen and the early sun turned the snow color of raw honey. And somewhere upstairs, a small voice, her nephew Kyle, was asking someone why they couldn't go outside yet. And the whole cabin was about to wake up and be full of wonderful, chaotic, demanding life. This is good, she said. The French toast. Your dad's recipe. I found the index cards in the drawer. She looked at the kitchen drawer. She looked back at her plate. She did not cry. She was 52 years old and she had, over the past 3 years, gotten very good at choosing when to feel things and when to neatly defer them. She filed this one, your dad's recipe, the index cards under later, and took another bite. And Daniel poured himself coffee and sat across from her, and they were quiet together in the good way, the way of people who had learned long ago that silence between them didn't need to be filled. The cabin began to wake up. The day began. The Henderson's tree farm was 7 miles outside of town, on a hill that Claire had been going to since she was 4 years old, and it looked exactly the same. There were always exactly too many of them for the single horse-drawn wagon, so half the family hiked in while the other half rode, and then everyone argued about which tree, and then Elaine made the final decision as if she had not already decided before leaving the cabin. This year was no different, except that Claire was slightly out of breath from the cold air and the uphill walk, and Daniel matched his pace to hers without comment, falling slightly behind the main group. You okay? He asked. I'm from Maine. I'm supposed to be hardier than this. You're from Vermont originally. Maine was a lifestyle choice. Maine has the best independent bookshops on the eastern seaboard. That's fair. He looked out over the hill, the rows of trees, the families dotting the white field. How's the shop doing? Good. Really good, actually. She exhaled, watching her breath. The holiday season's been strong. I hired a second person in September, a girl named Maya, who knows more about contemporary fiction than anyone I've met. It helps. She paused. It helps to have someone to talk to about it. You were always lonely there alone. She glanced at him. He said it simply, without accusation, the way he said all true things. Yeah, she said, I was. They walked for a bit. The tree farm smelled of pine and cold earth and something clean. Does Thomas like the cabin? She asked, changing course. He loves it. He always has. Daniel's voice did something when he talked about his son softened, opened up a register she didn't hear otherwise. She talked, two, one mine, of the fair, that namer. Daniel's voice did something. Amara used to bring him here every summer, when the Ashfords would have them. A brief pause. He has her laugh. It catches me off guard still sometimes. Amara, his wife, who had been gentle and generous and had loved Daniel with a patience that Claire had always, privately, found extraordinary and slightly heartbreaking, in a way she'd never allowed herself to examine too closely. She was wonderful, Claire said. She was. A long exhale. She made it easier at the end. She was practical about it, in the way she was practical about everything, and it made it possible for me to be present with her. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know if I made it easier for her. You did, Claire said, immediately and certainly. Daniel, you absolutely did. He looked at her. In the winter light, with snow on the shoulders of his coat and his eyes that steady, warm brown, he looked like someone carrying something carefully, something he'd learned to balance. How do you know? He said. Because I know you. She stopped walking. You show up. You always show up. You showed up for my dad, every Tuesday, for 18 months. That's different. It's not different. You showed up for Amara the same way you show up for everyone who matters to you, and you don't even think about it. You just do it. She was slightly surprised at the heat in her own voice. So yes, I know. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression was something she couldn't fully translate, something that started as gratitude and went somewhere else, somewhere deeper, before he quietly closed it off. Thank you, he said, for saying that. I meant it. I know you did. Up ahead, Sophie was calling them she'd found the tree, apparently, which was, by the sound of Elaine's response, about 2 feet taller than regulation. They started walking again. Their arms were close together in the narrow space between the trees, not touching. Very nearly touching. Dinner on the second evening was the kind of meal that only happened in the specific, magnificent chaos of large families at Christmas. Too much food, not enough elbow room, overlapping conversations, and Claire's great aunt Ruth telling a story that had been told at every family gathering since approximately 1974, while everyone listened as though hearing it for the first time. Claire was seated beside Daniel and across from Bess, who had been giving Claire meaningful looks since approximately the moment they arrived, which Claire had been aggressively failing to acknowledge. The wine was good, the fire was going. Elaine, at the head of the table, was watching everything with the particular satisfied attention of a woman whose holiday plan was proceeding as intended. I want to say, Elaine began, and the table gradually quieted, the way it always did when Elaine used that particular tone, how glad I am to have everyone here. This is a special Christmas, a smile at Sophie and Owen, a very special one, and I'm especially glad she looked down the table past several cousins and Bess and Pete, directly at Claire and then at Daniel, with the transparent subtlety of a neon sign that Claire brought her special friend Daniel to celebrate with us. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. Bess made a sound into her wine glass that might have been a laugh disguised as a cough. He's not Claire began. We've known Daniel for 30 years, Elaine continued, unperturbed, to the assembled table. He's practically family, more than practically, some might say. And this is the first year he and Claire have come together, which I think is just lovely, don't you? The cousins who had not been briefed began to nod and smile with the enthusiasm of people who were picking up a cue they didn't fully understand but were committed to supporting. Under the table, Claire felt Daniel's shift. She looked at him. He was looking at Elaine with an expression of extremely composed patience. And then he looked at Claire, and in that look, she saw something that was 50%, I'm sorry about this, and 50%, something warmer and more complicated that she couldn't examine right now because her great aunt Ruth was patting her hand and saying, "Oh, how sweet, dear, how sweet." And Bess had given up on the pretense and was openly grinning. "Mom," Claire said, as evenly as she could manage. More potatoes? Said Elaine, already reaching for the bowl. Later, doing dishes, Daniel appeared at her shoulder with a dish towel. I can take the couch, he said, properly, or the floor. The floor. I've slept on floors before. Daniel, I'm serious. I don't want to make things awkward. You're not making things awkward. She rinsed the plate. My mother is making things awkward. There is a difference. She passed him the plate and he dried it without comment. And it's fine. The pillow wall situation is fine. We're adults. She said it again. She was apparently going to keep saying it until it felt like enough. He put the plate in the cabinet. He said mildly, "Do you want me to tell them we're not? Would it help?" He considered. Your family has already decided what they want to be true. Exactly. So we let it go for the week, she said. It doesn't matter. He looked at her with an expression that was very still and very careful. All right, he said, if that's what you want. She handed him the next plate. Their fingers touched briefly at the transfer, just the ordinary logistics of dish passing. And she looked down at the sink and told herself that the warmth that moved up her arm was the dishwater. It was Sophie who found the box. She was looking for extra ornament hooks in the storage closet off the hall and came out holding a shoebox with a look on her face that meant she had found something interesting. Mom, look at this. She opened it on the kitchen table. Old photographs, the printed kind, slightly faded at the edges. Christmas photos, summers at the cabin, birthdays. And Sophie, with the unerring instinct of someone who had grown up watching too many romantic comedies, found the one. Claire at 20, at Daniel's college graduation party, or maybe it was a New Year's party, she couldn't remember, only that it was winter because she was wearing the enormous green sweater she'd bought from a thrift store in Burlington. She was mid-laugh, genuinely, the kind of laugh that arrived before you could arrange your face around it. And she was leaning, just leaning, naturally, entirely, without intention against Daniel's shoulder. He was 22, leaner, his hair dark, looking at the camera with a small, private sort of smile. He was holding a cup in one hand. His other hand was very nearly at her back. Not touching, very nearly. Claire stared at it. You two look the same, Sophie said softly. We were babies. You look happy. Claire looked at 20-year-old herself. She did look happy. She looked like someone who didn't know yet what was coming. The years, the marriage, the slow erosion of feeling seen, all of it. Someone who was simply fully there, laughing in a green sweater against someone's shoulder. Can I have this? Sophie asked. Put it back, Claire said, too quickly. Sophie studied her. Sophie had her father's analytical mind and, unfortunately, Claire's own ability to read a room. She put the photograph back in the box without another word, and Claire closed the shoebox and put it on the shelf, and then stood in the hall for a moment with her hand on the wood and her eyes closed and 32 years of something moving quietly through her. She went and found Daniel in the back room helping Thomas with something, a puzzle, of all things, one of Elaine's 1,000-piece endeavors, and she stood in the doorway watching him for a moment. He was leaning over the table, pointing at something, and Thomas said something that made him laugh, and Claire cataloged that laugh like a fact she was going to need to keep. She went back to the kitchen and made tea she didn't particularly want and told herself this was fine. The lake froze solid every winter, thick enough to drive a truck on by January, and the family had skated here for generations. Elaine had everyone in skates by 2 in the afternoon, which meant the light was still good, long, gold, December afternoon light that made everything look like a painting done from memory. Claire had not skated in 6 years. This became apparent almost immediately. She made it approximately 8 feet from the bank before her ankles staged a quiet revolt and she wobbled significantly in the direction of disaster. A hand closed around hers. I've got you, Daniel said. He was steadier on skates than she would have expected. He'd been taking Thomas skating every winter for years, apparently, which she hadn't known. He was entirely steady, actually, and his grip was warm and firm without being restrictive, and he steered her gently back toward the center of the ice without making her feel incompetent. I used to be good at this, she said. You were never that good at this. I was adequately good at this. You went into the bank in 1995 and I had to pull you out. She laughed. He turned them slowly, steering them parallel to the shore, and the family was scattered across the lake, Bess and Pete in lazy circles, Sophie pulling a protesting Owen toward the center, Thomas teaching Kyle a backward crossover, little Elaine watching from the shore in her enormous coat with a cup of cocoa. The world was quiet and white and lit gold. I like your life, Daniel said. He said it simply, looking out at the ice. The shop. Maine. You seem more like yourself than you did before, when I see you on calls. More like myself, she repeated. When you were, a careful pause. When you were married, you used to apologize a lot for your opinions, your enthusiasm, for taking up too much time. He looked at her. You don't do that anymore. She considered this. I didn't notice I was doing it, she said finally. I know, his voice was soft. That's what I mean. Her feet were steadier now, she realized. She hadn't needed his hand for balance in a while. He still had it. She still wasn't letting go. She looked down at their joined hands. She looked up at the gold sky. Daniel, she began, without knowing exactly what she was going to say. Claire, he said, at the same time, equally beginning with no end. They stopped. They looked at each other. Somewhere behind them, Kyle shrieked with laughter, and the moment, whatever it had been, whatever it was, becoming, opened like a door, and then gently, carefully, was left ajar. Neither of them finished their sentence. They skated until the light went. The cabin was asleep. It was past midnight and Claire had come downstairs for water and found Daniel at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and his phone turned face down, and something about the set of his shoulders told her he wasn't sleeping either. She got her water. She sat down. Can't sleep? She said. No. He looked up. You? No. She turned her glass in her hands. Outside, the lake was blue, dark, and still, the snow on its surface, catching what little moon there was. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. She looked at the table. What did you think when I told you the marriage was ending, really? A long pause. He considered not the way people considered when they were deciding what they were allowed to say, but the way Daniel always considered, genuinely working toward the truest thing. I thought, he said carefully, that you had been disappearing for a long time, and I was relieved it was ending, and I felt terrible for being relieved. The word landed in her chest. Disappearing. That's what it felt like, she said. She hadn't told him this. She hadn't told anyone this. Precisely. Not bad. Not, he wasn't unkind. It was more like I would say something, have an opinion, tell a story, be excited about something, and it would just, she opened her hand, fall, like it had no weight. Like I wasn't present in the room. She heard her own voice and felt the familiar reflex to qualify it, soften it, apologize for taking up too much space with her own feelings. She didn't. I started to believe it was true, she said, that I was the one who wasn't. She stopped. I'm sorry. This is... Don't. His voice was quiet but firm. Don't apologize. She looked up. You were never invisible, he said. Not to me. Not for one day in 30 years. He held her gaze, and there was something in his that was not the gentle steadiness of friendship, or, not only that, something that lived deeper, held longer. When you walk into a room, Claire, any room, a crowded one, I've been in for an hour already, I know you're there, before I see you, before I hear you. A pause. It has always been like that. The kitchen was very quiet. Her heart was beating too loudly for what was supposed to be a friendly late-night kitchen conversation. That's, she started and stopped and tried again. Daniel? You don't have to say anything. He picked up his tea. I just wanted you to know that. As your friend. He emphasized it slightly, enough that she understood it was a choice he was making, a line he was drawing with deliberate care. What you felt wasn't you. It was never you. She sat with that. Let it settle. Outside, the snow held perfectly still. Thank you, she said. Get some sleep, he said softly. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark on her side of the pillow wall and pressed her hand flat against her sternum and felt the steady, too fast beat of her own heart and realized, with the clarity of cold water, that she was in serious trouble. The pillow wall, that night, felt simultaneously very necessary and almost absurdly thin. She was very aware of the rhythm of his breathing in the dark, the way it settled and slowed toward sleep while she remained acutely, unhelpfully awake. She counted backward from 100 3 times. She considered the ceiling. She recited silently the entire plot of North and South, which usually put her straight to sleep, and tonight functioned only as a reminder that she had extremely specific opinions about slow burn literary romance. Oh no, she thought. Oh no, oh no, oh no. I have opinions about this because I am experiencing it. She put her face into her pillow. She was 52 years old. She owned a bookshop. She was a grown adult woman who had been through a divorce and built a new life and knew herself extremely well, and she was lying here at 2 in the morning catastrophizing about her best friend because he said something true and kind and remembered her coffee order. He's always remembered your coffee order, said the extremely unhelpful part of her brain. For 30 years, he has remembered exactly how you take your coffee. She pressed the pillow harder against her face. The bathroom the following morning, 6:45, Claire's face still water cold, and her eyes doing the thing they did when she'd slept less than 5 hours. Bess came in to borrow the good hairdryer and then didn't leave. So, Bess said, don't. I haven't said anything yet. Your face has said something. Bess put the hairdryer down and leaned against the counter and looked at Claire with the specific expression of a younger sister who had been watching something play out in slow motion since 1993 and had finally run out of patience. You are in love with that man, Bess said, and you are absolutely terrified. I'm going to need you to respect the concept of personal boundaries. I have no memory of you setting any. Bess folded her arms. Claire, I've watched you two for 30 years. I was there when you met him, freshman orientation. And you came home and said, I met a boy at orientation, and he's very boring, but excellent company, which meant you liked him a lot and didn't want to say so. I was 18, and now you're 52 and nothing has changed. You're just better at pretending. Claire dried her hands. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked, she had to admit, like someone who had not slept because she had been lying awake 2 feet from someone she was definitely not in love with. He's my best friend, she said. Yes, and? And I'm 52 and I have a life in Portland and my daughter's engagement is this week and this is not the time. For what? For any of this. Bess was quiet for a moment. What are you scared of? Claire set down the towel. That I'll get it wrong again, she said, finally, quietly. That I'll believe in something and it'll be the wrong, that I'll be the wrong. She stopped. Reorganized. I spent 22 years feeling like I wasn't enough for someone who genuinely cared about me. If I'm wrong about this, she couldn't finish the sentence. Bess's expression went soft. She reached over and squeezed Claire's arm. He's not that, she said. Claire, he is the exact opposite of that. He has been looking at you like you hang the moon since 1993. And he is standing 6 feet away in this cabin being so patient and so careful because he knows you needed to get here on your own. A pause. He's not going to let you disappear. That's not in him. Claire said, nothing. Talk to him, Bess said. Before you go back to Portland and put 500 miles between you and spend another year on FaceTime pretending this isn't what it is. The hairdryer was gathered. Bess left. Claire stood alone in the small bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Christmas Eve afternoon came in silver and dark. The weather service had been predicting a significant snowstorm and delivered enthusiastically. By 2 o'clock, the sky was the color of pewter, and the snow was coming sideways off the lake in curtains that turned the tree line ghostly. The power went out at 3:15. Within 20 minutes, Elaine had produced candles from what appeared to be a limitless supply in the hall closet. Pete had gotten the fire up to a quality roar, and the family had organized itself instinctively into the warm sitting room with blankets and the Scrabble board and an extremely competitive Bess, who was already challenging Kyle's placement of zither. "It's a real word," Kyle insisted. "On a triple word score," Bess said. "All the best words are on triple word scores." The candles made the room amber and small and close, and outside the storm pressed against the windows and made the old cabin creak and settle in that way it had, like it was breathing, like it was pleased to be full of people. Claire found space on the wide window seat in the alcove off the sitting room, pulling her knees up and watching the lake disappear into the white. A few minutes later, Daniel settled beside her, not asked, just there, the way he had been for 30 years, close enough that their shoulders touched through their sweaters. The Scrabble game went on. Sophie laughed at something Owen said. Thomas was explaining the structure of the game to Great Aunt Ruth with infinite patience. Claire and Daniel sat in the amber and the snow. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly under the conversation. "That I don't want to go back," she said, surprising herself. "To Portland when the week's over." She looked at the white lake. "I thought coming back would feel smaller than it did when I left. I thought 3 years would have made the town shrink." She shook her head. "It's exactly the same size. I'm the one who shrunk." He was quiet, listening. "I've been so careful," she said, "in Portland, about not wanting too much, taking up too much space, needing things." She turned and looked at him. He was watching her with that particular attention of his, the kind that made her feel, every time, like she was the only person in the room. "That's what I've been doing for 3 years, Daniel. Being very careful." "What if you stopped being careful?" he said, low and steady. The snow pressed against the window, the fire crackled, and Bess says something triumphant about the Scrabble board. "What if you stopped being careful?" She looked at him. He was very close in the small alcove space, and the candlelight was doing something to his eyes that she wasn't going to examine. She felt the pull of something enormous and patient, like a tide that had been moving in the same direction for a very long time and had finally reached the shore. She almost said it. The thing she'd been carrying since the airport, since the coffee cup, since the photograph, since the conversation in the kitchen at midnight. She almost said, "I think I'm in love with you, and I have been for a long time, and I'm terrified and I need you to tell me what to do." But Sophie called out to them to come play Scrabble, and the moment broke gently, and they went. He almost told her that evening, on the porch. She'd stepped outside for air around 9, and he'd followed after a few minutes, the way he always followed. And they'd stood with hot mugs in the storm's aftermath, the snow having quieted to something light and decorative, and the cold had that particular clarity it got after a storm. He had opened his mouth. He had thought, "I have been in love with you since 1993, and I have been very careful about it, and I am tired of being careful." He had thought, "You walked into my life at 20, and you never walked out of it. Not really, and I built something good while you were gone, but you were always the one I told things to first." He had not said any of it, because she had her cup in both hands, and her cheeks were cold and pink, and she was looking at the sky after the storm with the particular expression he'd loved for 30 years open and wondering, slightly undone by beauty, and he did not want to be the thing that complicated this moment for her. He was not willing to be another pressure, another demand, another voice telling her what she should want. He would wait. He had been waiting since 1993. He could wait until she was ready to choose it herself, if she ever was. He told himself he was okay with that. He was not entirely okay with that. "Stars are coming out," she said. "They are," he agreed. They stood in the cold and watched the sky clear, shoulder to shoulder, and he did not say the things he didn't say, and she didn't say whatever she'd been on the edge of saying on the window seat, and the night was beautiful anyway, and they had always been good at this being in the same place, the same quiet, without needing it to be more than what it was. For now, Sophie found Claire in the small room off the kitchen the next morning, practicing her rehearsal dinner speech in front of a mirror. She did not seem embarrassed to have been caught. "I want to say it right," Sophie said. "Will you listen?" She went through it. It was about Owen and what she loved in him and what she learned love could be. She talked about reliability, about being seen on ordinary days. She said, "Love that shows up on Tuesdays. Love that's consistent and unflashy and there. The kind that makes you feel like the world is a more navigable place." Claire was crying before Sophie finished. She didn't try to hide it. She sat with it, her hands quiet in her lap, listening to her daughter describe in 26-year-old words what she had spent 30 years circling. Sophie looked at her. "Mom, it's beautiful. Are you crying about my speech or about something else?" Claire laughed a wet, undignified laugh. "Both." Sophie sat next to her. She put her head on Claire's shoulder, the way she'd done since she was 7. "I see how he looks at you," Sophie said. "Daniel, I've seen it my whole life. I always thought, I used to wonder what you were waiting for. It wasn't the right time. Is it the right time now?" A pause. Outside, someone was singing off-key to a Christmas song on the cabin's old radio. "I don't know how to be brave about this," Claire said quietly. Sophie lifted her head. She looked at her mother, at 52-year-old Claire, who had been brave about so many things, who had ended a marriage and moved to a new city and built something from scratch and gotten up every morning with the clear, kind eyes of someone who loved her completely. "Yes, you do," Sophie said. It was a cream-colored cup with a small blue bird painted on the side. Claire had seen it her entire life. Her parents had received it as a wedding gift. The first Christmas, they were married. It has survived 54 years on that shelf, through moves and grandchildren and holidays and grief. And it broke on December 24th because Claire reached past it for the nutmeg and caught it with her elbow and heard it hit the tile floor in a way that was unambiguous. She stood there. She looked at the 3 pieces. And something about it, the cup that had been there her entire life, her parents' first Christmas, 54 years of mornings, all of it now in 3 clean pieces on the floor, cracked something loose in her that she hadn't known was available to be cracked. It was not about the cup. She knew. It was about everything the cup was adjacent to. It was about her father's handwriting on index cards in a kitchen drawer. It was about 30 years. It was about the photograph in the shoebox. It was about being 52 and tired of being so careful. She sat down on the kitchen floor next to the broken pieces. She heard his footsteps in the hall. She heard them stop. She heard, and this was the part she would remember for the rest of her life, she heard him not say anything, not ask what happened, not try to fix it. She heard him simply sit down on the kitchen floor next to her, back against the cabinet, shoulder against hers, 2 adults on a cold tile floor, and stay. Just stay. "My mom got this their first Christmas together," she said after a while. "I know." His voice was quiet. "She used to tell the story every time someone reached for it. 54 years. Yeah." The kitchen was still outside. Somewhere. The family was scattered through the cabin in the particular peaceful way of Christmas Eve mid-afternoon. Everyone occupied. No one looking for them. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah." She turned to look at him. He was very close. His shoulder was warm against hers. He was looking at the cup. And his profile was familiar in the way of something you've studied without meaning to all your life. The particular angle of his jaw, the way he held his mouth when he was listening, the gray at his temples that she'd watched arrive over the last 5 years on video calls. "I think I've been in love with you," she said, "for a very long time." He turned to look at her. She held his gaze, her heart going quite fast. "And I'm terrified of getting it wrong, of wanting something I don't, of not being enough." "Stop," he said softly, not unkindly. "Just stop." "Daniel, you have never in your life been not enough." He said it like a fact, level and certain and load-bearing. Not for one day. Not to me. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering at her cheek, and the tenderness of it made her chest ache. I have been in love with you since 1993, Claire. I have had 30 years to be very sure about it. There is nothing to get wrong. She looked at him. Her eyes were full. On the floor? She said, voice rough. You're telling me this? On the kitchen floor? His eyes warmed, and the corner of his mouth lifted into that smile, the private one, the one she'd seen in the photograph, and she laughed, helplessly, wetly, and he laughed too. And it was exactly like them, it was exactly them, to have this conversation on a cold tile floor next to a broken cup. We'll fix it, he said quietly. The cup. There's a technique gold joinery. It becomes more beautiful where it broke. She looked at him. She understood he was not only talking about the cup. She put her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. Okay, she said. She went to bed that night with his hand warm in hers, walked up the stairs together, and they moved the pillow wall mutually, without discussion, with a simplicity that felt like the opposite of complicated, and lay in the dark and talked for a long time and then didn't talk, and the night was quiet and the snow kept watch outside the window. Christmas morning. She woke to the cabin, filling with the sounds of people who loved each other and coffee being made and the childlike anticipatory energy that Christmas morning produced regardless of anyone's age. Under the tree, there was a box with her name in Daniel's handwriting. She opened it after Sophie's engagement gifts and her mother's small, careful treasures and Kyle's enormous enthusiasm about his new sled. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with a sprig of pine tucked under the string. Inside, a first edition of A Room with a View, its spine soft with age, smelling of good old paper. She opened the cover. There was a note on a playing card in his neat architectural hand. You have always deserved to be fully seen. I have always seen you. D. She held the book. She looked up. He was already watching her from across the room with his coffee in his hand and Thomas talking at him about something. And when her eyes found his, he smiled, the full one, the real one, the one she intended to make her life's work to keep seeing. She went to him. She didn't think about it. She walked through the room with the book in one hand and everyone watching, and she didn't care. She was done being careful, and she stood in front of him and he set his coffee down and she kissed him. It was warm and certain and tasted like coffee and Christmas morning, and when she pulled back, his eyes were shining, and she thought, 30 years. 30 years. And here we are. Finally, said Bess loudly from the couch. Elaine, without looking up from her tea, I told you. Sophie burst into tears of the happy kind. Thomas shook his head slowly, smiling. I genuinely thought this was going to take another decade, he said. Daniel laughed the full, unguarded laugh she catalogued like something precious, and kept his hands warm at her waist, and said quietly, just for her, I've been waiting a long time for that. I know, she said. Was it worth it? She looked at him, the gray at his temples, the warm, familiar face, the man who had sat down on a kitchen floor without being asked and simply stayed. Ask me in 50 years, she said. He smiled. Deal, he said. What happened after was this. Sophie cried, and Owen held her, and Bess dramatically announced she had known since 1993 and was owed a significant apology from everyone who had questioned her. Great Aunt Ruth said, "Oh, lovely, dear lovely," and appeared to believe this had been arranged all along. Kyle asked if Daniel was his uncle now, and Elaine said that was something to figure out, but yes, probably. Thomas shook Daniel's hand first and then surprised everyone, including himself, by hugging him, a real hug, the kind young people gave when they meant it, and said, "Lo, she makes you happy," and Daniel said, "She does," and that was that. Claire called her friend in Portland who ran the shop and said she might be a few days late getting back. Her friend said she had assumed so, and was it Daniel? And Claire said yes, and her friend said finally, I have had the book all picked out for your wedding speech for years. The rest of the day was Christmas as it was supposed to be. Meals and stories and the new snow on the lake and the fire going and the lights on the cabin's roofline burning gold in the dark. And Claire with her shoulder against Daniel's for no reason except that it was where she wanted to be. Epilogue. 1 year later, Christmas in Pinecrest. The porch of the cabin. Christmas Eve evening. The exact same hour as 1 year before that post-storm quiet, the sky clearing to stars, the snow doing its soft, meticulous best with the pine trees. She had her coat and her better suited for Vermont boots she'd invested, and her hot tea, and Daniel beside her. The family was inside. Sophie and Owen were in the kitchen, cooking something ambitious. Elaine was beating Bess at cards. Thomas had brought his girlfriend this year, a quietly brilliant marine biologist named Dara, who had earned Thomas's trust by correctly identifying 3 different tree species on the first afternoon, which Daniel had noted with private, unmistakable pride. It was cold and still and exactly right. "Claire," Daniel said. "May." He turned to face her. She turned and saw his expression and felt her breath go. He was not nervous. That was the thing she noticed first. He was exactly himself, steady, certain, present. He had something in his coat pocket, and he didn't make a production of reaching for it, just did, and it was a small box. "I have been in love with you for 32 years, he said, "and I have been happy every day of this one. I want," he paused, "not from uncertainty, just to find the precise truth. I want mornings. I want the couch and the coffee and the bookshop and the lake and whatever difficult, wonderful years come next. I want to be the person you call when something is terrible and the person you call when something is extraordinary, and every ordinary thing in between." She was crying. She was entirely aware she was crying and entirely unconcerned about it. He opened the box. A simple ring, not fussy. He knew her. He knew her exactly. "Will you marry me?" he said. "Not to be careful about it. Not eventually. I mean, now. I mean, yes." She took his face in both her hands. "Yes," she said, before he'd quite finished. "Yes, Daniel, yes." He exhaled a long, quiet exhale, 32 years in it, and he was smiling, and she was crying, and he slid the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms, her face against his chest, the familiar heartbeat of him, the cedar and clean wool smell, the solid there-ness of him. Inside the cabin, someone must have seen Sophie, probably, watching from the window the way she always watched, because a sound went up, a warm, chaotic, multi-generational sound of people who loved each other celebrating something beautiful. "They're watching," she said into his chest. "I know. We should probably go in." Probably. Neither of them moved. The snow fell clean and quiet over the lake, over the lit cabin, over 32 years of arriving, finally, at the right place. The stars were out. End of quote. The cup on the kitchen shelf, gold at its seams, more beautiful where it had broken, caught the window light. She held his hand. She was home. "Thank you for spending this Christmas with Claire and Daniel." If this story made your heart feel a little warmer, a little more hopeful, a little more sure that it is never, never too late for the love you were always meant to have, good. That's why we're here. From Mature Hearts Narrations. Until next time, keep your tea warm and your heart open. So the story has come to a close, my wonderful friends, and if you're still here with me right now, I think something in this story touched your heart in a way you weren't quite expecting. Maybe it was Claire sitting on that cold kitchen floor next to a broken cup. Maybe it was Daniel steady, patient Daniel who never stopped seeing her, not for a single day in 30 years. Or maybe it was simply the quiet reminder that it is never, ever too late to be loved the way you were always meant to be loved. The Stoics believed that the obstacle is the way that everything we lose, every crack in the cup, every year we spent feeling invisible, is not a wound to hide, but a wound that teaches. Marcus Aurelius wrote that what injures the hive injures the bee, and I'd add the reverse is true. What heals one heart heals many. Claire's healing didn't begin when Daniel kissed her on Christmas morning. It began the moment she stopped apologizing for taking up space. That is where your healing begins too. You don't need a Vermont cabin or a childhood best friend with a green scarf. You need the courage to stop being so careful with your own heart. You deserve to be seen fully, consistently, on ordinary Tuesdays, not someday. Now, if this story moved you, if it gave you even one breath of hope, please give it a like, share it with someone whose heart needs a little warmth today, and subscribe to Mature Hearts Narrations so we can keep telling stories like this one together. We'll be here every week with a warm cup and a story worth staying for. One More Christmas is an original, fictional romance story created exclusively for Mature Hearts Narrations. All characters, including Claire Ashford, Daniel Mercer, and the Ashford family, are entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons is purely coincidental. This story is written for mature audiences who enjoy clean, emotional romance narratives centered on second chances, healing, and hope. The philosophical references to Stoicism, including Marcus Aurelius, are used for inspirational context only and do not represent academic or historical instruction. This channel does not promote any specific relationship advice, therapy, or life coaching. Our content is storytelling. If you are experiencing personal difficulties, please seek qualified professional support. We simply tell stories and hope they remind you that your story is still being written.